on a rain-soaked night in Minneapolis, when the streets glimmered like broken mirrors and the city exhaled a tired November chill, Lucy Bennett stood alone inside the dim café where she worked the closing shift, wiping down the same counter she had already cleaned twice, stalling because she dreaded returning to the small apartment that held nothing but bills, silence, and the sound of her mother coughing behind thin walls. The rain tapped harder against the glass, a restless, impatient rhythm, and Lucy tightened her jacket as she stepped outside to lock the front door. That was when the low, almost predatory hum of an engine sliced through the quiet. A black sedan, sleek, polished, out of place in her neighborhood, rolled to a stop directly in front of her. For a moment, nothing happened. The lights stayed on, the engine idled, and the rain formed a halo of mist around the hood. Then the back door opened. A tall man stepped out into the downpour without an umbrella, and the storm seemed to bend around him rather than soak him. His suit clung to his shoulders, darkened by the rain, but he carried himself like a man who had never once been owned by circumstance. Lucy froze. It wasn't his appearance, though he looked like someone who belonged in the kind of world she only saw through glass windows she couldn't afford to enter, but the expression in his eyes, sharp, exhausted, searching for something he did not expect to find here. For a moment their eyes met, and Lucy felt the strange, electric pressure of being seen too clearly by someone who had no reason to look at her at all. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He only exhaled slowly, as if the night itself had pushed him to this exact place, at this exact moment, and he was too tired to resist anymore. The rain intensified, drumming on the pavement, sliding down his jaw, blurring the distance between them. Lucy hesitated, wondering if he needed help or if she should run back inside. But before she could ask, he turned away, walked toward the alley beside the café, and disappeared without another sound. The black sedan pulled off a heartbeat later, leaving only the smell of wet asphalt and a strange ache in Lucy's chest, as if something enormous had shifted beneath the surface of her quiet life. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why he had appeared there. But as she stood under the flickering street lamp, the cold sinking into her bones, she felt a terrifying certainty settle in her mind. That this night, this fleeting collision with a stranger dripping rain and secrets, was the beginning of something that would unravel everything she thought she understood about her world and herself. And though she tried to shake it off, tried to blame it on exhaustion and the storm, she couldn't deny the truth pulsing quietly inside her. Nothing in her life would be the same after tonight. The next morning, Minneapolis felt strangely louder, as if the whole city had woken up buzzing with a secret Lucy hadn't been told yet. She walked to the café through the thin winter sunlight, replaying the image of the man in the rain over and over, telling herself it meant nothing. People wandered in and out for their morning coffee, the usual mix of exhausted nurses, frantic students, and construction workers shaking off the cold. Everything felt normal, until her coworker Sam burst through the door, phone in hand, breathless. "Lucy, you're not gonna believe this," he said, shoving the screen toward her. On it was a headline from the morning news. Adrian Hale spotted in North Loop late last night. A blurry photo showed a dark sedan and a tall man stepping out into the rain. Her heart punched upward. It was him, Adrian Hale. Even Lucy, who paid more attention to grocery store discounts than billionaire gossip, knew the name. He was the prodigy CEO behind Hale Dynamics, the tech giant that practically ran half the city's digital infrastructure. He was the youngest self-made billionaire in Minnesota, a man whispered about in boardrooms, worshipped by investors, and feared by competitors. People called him the ghost billionaire because he avoided publicity, never gave interviews, and appeared in public only when necessity forced him. He was brilliance wrapped in ice, untouchable, unreadable, unpredictable. And he had been standing in front of her cafe last night like a man lost in a storm he couldn't negotiate his way out of. Lucy stared at the headline, feeling the world tilt. Why would someone like him be in her neighborhood at that hour? North Loop wasn't dangerous, but it certainly wasn't a playground for the ultra-wealthy. It was a place where people like her worked second jobs and tried not to drown in life's small, relentless demands. Nothing about him fit into this landscape of worn brick and neon signs. As the morning rush calmed, Lucy found herself replaying the moment their eyes met. She had seen something in him, something hollow, something unraveling. Not the arrogance she expected from a man with an empire in his hands, but a strange, brittle exhaustion, like a person who had been carrying the weight of too many lives for too long. Customers chatted about him nonstop. One woman whispered, "Did you hear his company is prepping some huge acquisition?" Another replied, "No, I heard he's disappearing again. Stress, maybe." Rumors swirled, each one more dramatic than the last, painting Adrian as everything from a genius on the edge of burnout to a heartless machine incapable of feeling anything at all. Lucy listened silently, wondering which version, if any, was true. She didn't want to care, but her mind kept circling back to the way he had looked at her, not like a billionaire assessing a stranger, but like a man staring into a window he wasn't sure he wanted to open. When her break finally came, Lucy stepped outside, leaning against the cool brick wall, letting the winter wind clear her thoughts. She should forget the whole thing. She had bills to pay, shifts to cover, a sick mother waiting at home. Her life didn't have room for mysteries wrapped in billion-dollar suits. And yet, as she scrolled through the articles on her phone, reading about the companies he built, the projects he led, the billions he wielded effortlessly, she felt the quiet, unnerving truth settle deeper. The man who had appeared out of the storm wasn't just powerful. He was a force that bent entire industries, redirected futures, and shaped the world around him. And somehow, impossibly, he had stepped into hers. Standing there, Lucy felt a faint shiver trace her spine, not from the cold, but from something far more dangerous. The realization that last night had not been a coincidence. The universe, fate, or whatever unseen current guided wildly mismatched lives into collision, something had shifted. And the story she was about to walk into would not let her leave unchanged. Lucy was wiping down the espresso machine for the third time that morning, trying to convince herself the exhaustion she felt wasn't emotional, just physical, when the cafe door chimed with a soft, deliberate ring. Nothing rushed, nothing accidental. She looked up, and the world seemed to narrow to a single point. Adrian Hale, the man from the storm, the billionaire currently plastered across every news headline, stepped into the tiny cafe as if he had always belonged there. But he didn't. Everything about him looked wrong in this space. The tailored charcoal coat, the quiet authority in his posture, the subtle tension around his eyes like a man running on the last edge of adrenaline. The cafe's morning chatter died instantly. Sam nudged Lucy so hard she nearly dropped a mug. Adrian scanned the room as if searching for something, or someone, and when his eyes found hers, he walked toward her with a precision that made her pulse throb in her throat. "You're Lucy Bennett," he said, not asked, his voice low, calm, and startlingly steady for someone who looked like he hadn't slept in days. She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued, "I need your help." The sentence was so out of place that Lucy blinked, unsure if she misheard him. "My help? Not here." He glanced at the people staring, the phone subtly lifted, and his jaw shifted slightly. "Can we talk outside?" Every instinct screamed no. Every bill, every overdue notice, every moment of fear about her mother whispered yes. She followed him out to the sidewalk, the cold burning her cheeks. He didn't waste time. "I'm in need of a temporary personal assistant," he said, as if discussing the weather. 3 days. Starting today. Lucy coughed out a stunned breath. You don't know me. I know enough. Which is, you're honest. You think before you speak. And you don't look at me the way most people do." The words hit harder than they should have. Adrian's gaze was razor sharp, not unkind but terrifying in its clarity. He studied her like he was trying to determine the shape of her soul. "No contract for now," he added. "No interview." He slid a sleek black card into her hand. "I'll compensate you significantly for the inconvenience." She stared at the card. Just a number, embossed in silver. No title, no logo, just a direct line to him. "Why me?" she whispered. His jaw tightened the smallest fraction, and she sensed the truth lived somewhere behind his eyes, something he wasn't used to sharing. "Because I need someone who has no reason to lie to me," he murmured. "Someone who won't manipulate what I need to hear." The way he said it, quiet, almost vulnerable, did something uncomfortable to her. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. 3 days of helping a billionaire. It sounded absurd, impossible, dangerous. And yet the reminder of her mother's medical bills cut through her hesitation like a blade. "What exactly would I be doing?" she asked. "Mostly presents," he replied. A second set of eyes. Someone grounded. Someone who isn't part of the corporate noise. He took a slow breath, as if even explaining himself pulled energy he didn't have. I'll pick you up in 1 hour. He turned to leave, his coat whipping in the cold wind, but then paused, glancing back at her with a look that made her heart misfire. Lucy, don't say yes because you're desperate. Say yes because you can handle the truth when you see it. And then he stepped into a waiting car, not the flashy black sedan from last night, but a far more discreet SUV, and disappeared into traffic. Lucy stood there with the card burning in her hand, the cafe humming behind her, her world trembling on the edge of becoming something entirely unrecognizable. 3 days, 1 billionaire, and a choice that could either save her life or unravel it completely. Lucy spent the next hour pacing her tiny apartment, the black card lying on the table like a doorway she wasn't sure she should walk through. The heater rattled in the corner, pushing out air that never quite warmed the room, and in the bedroom her mother coughed in her sleep. A thin, fragile sound that reminded Lucy exactly why she didn't have the luxury of fear. She pulled her coat tighter, tied her hair back, and tried to stop her hands from shaking. When the knock came, sharp, precise, as if measured by a metronome, her heart leapt. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark suit, not Adrian, but clearly someone who worked for him, standing like a silent shadow in the hallway. Miss Bennett, he said with a polite nod. Mr. Hale is waiting downstairs. Lucy glanced once toward her mother's room, whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, and stepped into the hallway. The elevator ride felt like falling through someone else's life. And when the doors opened into the lobby, everything inside her stilled. Adrian stood near the entrance, speaking quietly into a phone, posture straight, shoulders tense. Even in silence, he commanded the space around him. The moment he saw her, he ended the call abruptly. You came, he said, the faintest relief flickering across his expression before disappearing so fast she wondered if she imagined it. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, she admitted. Then we're both uncertain about something today, he replied, opening the door for her. The SUV waiting outside wasn't ostentatious, but the interior whispered wealth in every detail. The smell of leather, the polished metal trim, the quiet hum of an engine too smooth to belong to an ordinary vehicle. As they pulled into traffic, Lucy kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Adrian watched the city blur past before speaking. You're wondering why I offered this to you. She almost laughed. I think that's reasonable. You looked at me last night and this morning without expectations, he said simply. Most people see what I can give them. Very few see what I am. She didn't know what to say to that. Adrian wasn't a man who dealt in flattery. Everything he said felt extracted from some internal calculation he rarely shared with anyone. What exactly do you need me to do? She asked again, more carefully this time. Adrian exhaled, not dramatically, but like a man who'd been holding his breath for weeks. I'm navigating a situation, he said, choosing each word as if it could explode. Something highly sensitive. I need someone who doesn't have ties to my company, to my investors, to the media. Someone with nothing to gain. He paused. Someone I can trust more than the people who claim loyalty to me. The weight of that confession settled over the car like fog. She wasn't sure if she felt honored or terrified. Maybe both. Mr. Hale, Adrian, he corrected gently. If you're helping me, we can skip formalities. His voice softened in a way that made her pulse trip. All right, Adrian, she said quietly. He turned his attention fully on her then, studying her face with an intensity that made her fight the urge to look away. Your life is complicated, he said, not as a question, but an observation. Your mother, your work, the bills. You don't talk about. Her breath caught. How? I don't invade people's privacy, he said quickly, seeing her tension spike. But I pay attention. Last night, I saw someone who's been carrying far too much for far too long. Someone who understands struggle without letting it harden her. His gaze held hers for a long, unnerving moment. That kind of person is rare. Lucy swallowed. She didn't know whether to thank him, deny it, or ask why any of this mattered to a man like him. Before she could respond, the SUV turned into an underground garage beneath Hale Dynamics Tower, a glass and steel giant that shadowed half the city. The car stopped, and Adrian stepped out first, offering his hand to her. She hesitated only a second before taking it. His grip was warm, steady, grounding in a way she didn't expect. 3 days, he said softly once she was beside him. After that, you walk away with payment and no obligation. And until then, she asked. He looked at her like a man standing on the edge of something he couldn't quite name. Until then, he murmured, you stay close. You see what I see, and you help me face the things I've spent far too long avoiding. They stepped into the private elevator together, the doors sliding shut behind them with a quiet hiss, sealing Lucy inside a world she had never imagined entering. A world built on silence, power, and secrets that could swallow her whole. And yet, standing beside him, she didn't feel fear. She felt the tremor of something new taking root inside her chest. Something that might save her, or destroy her. The storm hit on the second night of her temporary job, a whiteout blizzard that swallowed Minneapolis in a matter of hours, turning the skyline into a blur of ghostly lights and swirling frost. Lucy had stayed late to help sort through a maze of documents Adrian didn't trust anyone else with. Contracts thick with legal jargon, acquisition notes full of red flags, and personal memos that hinted at internal betrayals she didn't yet understand. She kept telling herself she was here for the paycheck, that this was just another job, another survival tactic. But she couldn't ignore the way Adrian kept watching her, not intrusively, but with the wary fascination of someone trying to decipher a language he'd forgotten how to speak. By the time she gathered her things and walked toward the elevator, the building had gone unnervingly still, the kind of silence that made her skin prickle. She pressed the button. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. A voice echoed behind her. The storm knocked out half the grid. Backup generators are prioritizing server floors. She turned to see Adrian walking toward her, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, the Crispio veneer almost entirely gone. He looked human, tired, and strangely at peace. So we're stuck? She asked. For a while. He motioned with his head. Come on. There's a lounge on this floor. Warmer than the hallway. She followed him through the dim corridor to a glass-walled room overlooking the blizzard. Snow slammed against the windows in thick sheets, and the city lights flickered like dying embers below. Adrian set his tablet aside, took off his coat, draped it over the back of a chair, and finally allowed his shoulders to drop. Lucy sat across from him, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian broke the silence with a low, almost bitter laugh. You probably think I'm ridiculous, he said, staring out at the storm. Running billion-dollar companies, building infrastructure, making decisions that affect thousands, but I can't handle a single night of quiet. Lucy tilted her head. You don't seem ridiculous. Just exhausted. He glanced at her, something unguarded flashing in his eyes. When my brother died, he said suddenly, voice steady but stripped of its usual armor, I stopped trusting silence. It's too loud, too honest. Lucy's breath caught. It was the first time he had mentioned family, not in passing, not as a curated detail the media regurgitated, but as a wound. I'm sorry, she said softly. What happened? Adrian looked down at his hands, as if the truth was carved there. A car accident. He was the only one who cared about me before the money, before the fame. After he was gone, everyone suddenly wanted something. He paused. I built this empire because it was easier than dealing with grief. The room felt smaller, warmer, filled with confessions she didn't expect him to offer. And you? He asked quietly. What are you running from? The question found the softest part of her. She looked out at the storm, letting the snow give her courage. My mother's sick, she whispered. Bills piling up. I keep working and working, but it feels like I'm holding my life together with dental floss. Adrian's expression shifted, compassion, anger on her behalf, something protective. You shouldn't have to carry that alone. We don't always get choices, she said. We just keep moving. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But you still look at the world like it hasn't beaten you yet. Maybe that's because if I let it beat me, no one else will take care of her. Their eyes met across the low glow of the emergency lights. Something softened. Something opened. The storm outside raged with violent force, but inside the room, the air grew strangely still, heavy with the kind of connection that didn't need romance to feel intimate. Just two people recognizing brokenness in each other. Adrian exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes when they stop pretending. Lucy, he murmured, you're the first person in a long time who doesn't make me feel like a commodity. "And you're the first person in a long time," she replied quietly, "who doesn't treat me like I'm invisible." Snow continued to batter the windows, the world outside disappearing into white, but neither of them moved away. They stayed there, in that fragile stillness, not touching, not reaching, just existing side by side, letting their walls slip piece by piece, as if the storm demanded honesty and they finally surrendered to it. And in that snowbound quiet, under flickering lights and the hum of failing power, something unnamed bloomed, slow, delicate, dangerous in its sincerity. Something that felt like the first warmth either of them had felt in far too long. The scandal didn't erupt like an explosion. No, it spread like poison, quiet at first, then unstoppable. Lucy woke up the next morning to her phone vibrating violently on the nightstand, dozens of notifications stacking faster than she could read them. At first she thought something had happened to her mother, but then she saw Sam's name, Myra's name, unknown numbers, message after message. "Lucy, are you okay? Is that really you? You need to see this now." Her stomach dropped. With trembling fingers, she tapped the first link. A photo filled the screen, a grainy, night-filtered shot of her stepping out of Adrian's SUV with the city lights behind her. She recognized the moment instantly. Last night after the blizzard, when Adrian insisted on driving her home so she wouldn't have to wait for a bus in the freezing wind. But the caption, God, the caption. Billionaire Adrian Hale and his secret girlfriend? Mystery woman leaves his private vehicle at 12:47 a.m. Beneath it, thousands of comments bloomed like rot. Some called her lucky. Most called her worse. Much worse. Within an hour, someone dug up her café's Instagram page. Another found her personal Facebook. Then came the TikToks, the edits, the speculation. The internet didn't care who she was. They cared about the narrative. Poor girl, rich man, scandal, betrayal, power imbalance, sex. All the things she had never asked for. By the time she arrived at the café, Sam met her at the door with a pale, horrified expression. "Lucy, the owner says you should take a few days off. Customers are taking pictures of the shop. Reporters came by asking for you." The words sliced deeper than she expected. Her job, her tiny lifeline, had become collateral damage to a rumor. She felt her throat tighten, vision blurring. She had done nothing. She had been careful, professional, distant even. And still, the world decided who she was without asking. Before she could catch her breath, her phone rang. Adrian. She stared at the screen, unsure whether to answer. But fear, sharp, protective fear, made the decision for her. "Hello. Where are you?" His tone was clipped, controlled, like he was restraining something dangerous beneath it. "At the café," she whispered. "Not anymore," he said. "I'm coming to get you." "Adrian, no. People are watching you," he cut in. "You're being followed. You need to leave now." She stepped back from the parking lot instinctively, her pulse spiking. "This shouldn't be happening," she whispered. "I didn't do anything." The silence on the line stretched, heavy and charged. "I know," he said finally, but there was something wrong in his voice. Something hesitant. Something cowardly. "Then why aren't you saying anything publicly?" she asked, her voice breaking despite her fight to stay steady. "You could clear this up in one sentence. Just say I'm not. I'm handling it internally," he interrupted sharply. "The more we feed the story, the bigger it gets. Silence is the best strategy." Silence. Of course it was. The rich and powerful loved silence. It protected them. But for people like her, silence was a weapon pointed at the throat. "So I'm supposed to just let the world tear me apart?" she whispered. Adrian didn't answer. And that hurt more than the rumors ever could. "Lucy, I need you to trust me," he finally said. "This will blow over." "That's easy for you to say," she whispered. "You're not the one losing everything." The line crackled softly. She could hear him breathing, could almost see him pressing his fingers to his forehead the way he did when he was overwhelmed. "Lucy, please. Don't walk away. Not now." But she could already feel herself unraveling, not from him, but from the realization that he was protecting himself, not her. That in his world, she was an acceptable casualty. She hung up without another word. Reporters shouted her name from across the street. A camera flashed in her direction like a gunshot. And in that blinding burst of light, Lucy understood something with devastating clarity. Whatever fragile connection she and Adrian had begun to build in the storm, it wasn't strong enough to survive the world he lived in. Not if he wouldn't stand beside her. Not if he stayed silent. And silence, she realized, was the one thing she couldn't forgive. Lucy didn't pack a suitcase, didn't slam a door, didn't make a dramatic exit. She simply walked. Out of the cafe, out of the chaos, out of the life that had suddenly become a battlefield she never agreed to step onto. Her breath clouded in the cold March air as she moved down the sidewalk, reporters shouting her name, their voices muffled by the ringing in her ears. She blocked them out, blocked everything out. Her body felt like it was moving underwater, heavy, slow, detached. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone had already lit up with missed calls. Adrian, Sam, unknown numbers, PR agencies, people pretending to care. She put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and let herself finally break, sinking to the floor with her back against the cabinet. She didn't cry loudly. No sobs, no gasps. Just silent tears sliding down her cheeks, the kind that came from something deeper than humiliation. Something like betrayal, disappointment, heartbreak without permission. Her mother found her like that 20 minutes later, lowered herself beside her, and touched her hand. "Can you what happened?" Lucy shook her head, unable to explain a world so far removed from theirs, a world where one rumor could erase her humanity, one photo could rewrite her entire identity, and one man's silence could dismantle the fragile tenderness they had begun to build. The next morning, she made her decision. She texted the cafe owner to say she would not be returning. She called a friend of a friend who owned a small cleaning service and asked if they needed help. They did. The pay was terrible, but the anonymity was priceless. She traded coffee machines and steady tips for mops and late-night office buildings, but the quiet was merciful. No cameras, no speculation, no Adrian. She disappeared from the online world entirely, deleting accounts, blocking strangers, retreating into a life small enough to feel safe again. But even in the safety of obscurity, Adrian lingered like a shadow in her chest. The way he had looked at her during the storm, the quiet confession in his voice, the softness he rarely let anyone see, and the way he hadn't chosen her when it mattered. Meanwhile, across the city, Adrian Hale was unraveling. Not publicly, no one saw it. No headlines read "Billionaire in freefall." But behind the glass walls of his minimalist penthouse, he moved like a man whose internal compass had shattered. His PR team begged him to make a statement. He refused. His board pushed him for clarity. He pushed back harder. But none of it fixed the image burned into his memory. Lucy's voice breaking when she asked why he wouldn't defend her, the fragile steadiness of her whisper right before she hung up. He replayed the moment in a loop that scraped at the edges of his sanity. He couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, couldn't pretend the silence he once relied on hadn't become a prison of his own creation. She had seen the truth in him long before he was ready to face it. And when she walked away, she took that truth with her, leaving him with nothing but reflections he no longer recognized. Out of desperation, or maybe something more dangerous, he started seeing a therapist, something he had avoided for years. The sessions were brutal. His walls, his grief, his obsession with control, his fear of attachment, all of it exposed. For the first time, he admitted he didn't know how to be close to people without hurting them. For the first time, he understood that his silence had been a survival mechanism, not strength. And, for the first time, he realized he had lost someone who saw him beyond his empire. Weeks passed. Lucy found small rhythms again. Grocery trips, late-night cleaning shifts, gentle conversations with her mother over warm soup. She rebuilt quietly, piece by piece, not stronger but more honest with herself. The pain didn't disappear, but it became a companion she could walk beside rather than an enemy she had to outrun. She didn't expect Adrian to call. She didn't want him to. Healing meant accepting the truth. He belonged to a world that consumed everything it touched. And she belonged to a life built on resilience, not spectacle. Yet, late at night when the city fell silent, a small voice inside her whispered a painful truth. She had loved him, even if only in the space of a few fragile days. And maybe, in another life, he could have loved her too. But this was not that life. And she refused to be undone again. The night Adrian finally showed up was one of those strangely warm spring evenings, the kind that fooled the city into thinking winter had loosened its grip for good. Lucy had just finished a cleaning shift at an accounting firm downtown, her shoulders aching, her fingers raw from chemicals, her mind exhausted from weeks of pushing away memories she didn't ask to keep. The street was quiet as she approached her apartment building. No reporters now, no cameras, no whispers. Just peace. Just the ordinary hum of a life she was slowly stitching back together. She was digging for her keys when she felt it. An instinctive thrum beneath her ribs, a shift in the air behind her, the sense of being seen. Not hunted, not cornered, just seen. She turned. Adrian Hale stood just beyond the pool of yellow streetlight, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket, hair slightly mussed from the wind, the sharp edges of his presence softened by something she couldn't immediately name. He looked nothing like the man from the headlines. Nothing like the billionaire who commanded rooms with a glance. He looked like someone who had broken open quietly, privately, and was still struggling to figure out what to do with all the pieces. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city hummed in the background, but it felt far away. "How did you find me?" she finally asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I didn't," he said softly. "I waited." He stepped into the light then, and she saw the truth carved into the tired lines of his face. He hadn't slept, not properly. He'd lost weight. He carried grief like a shadow stitched to his ribs. "Lucy," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like a confession. "I owe you the truth. All of it." She didn't move toward him, didn't invite him in. She folded her arms, creating just enough distance to protect herself. "You could have started by telling the world I wasn't your whatever they thought I was." His jaw tightened, not with anger, but shame. "I know," he murmured. "Silence has always been my weapon, my shield, my answer to everything. But this time, silence hurt the one person who didn't deserve it." She looked away, unable to hold the intensity of his gaze, but he continued, stepping no closer than she allowed. "You asked me why I didn't defend you," he said quietly. "And the truth is, I was afraid." That made her laugh, a small, disbelieving breath. "You? Afraid of choosing you," he said, and the words dropped between them like a stone. "Of what it would mean. Of what I would become in the eyes of the world. Of what I'd become in my own." His voice shook. Not much, but enough for her to feel the rawness beneath it. "Losing you showed me something my money, my company, my power never could. I've been living in a cage I built myself. And when the moment came to step out, I failed. I hurt you because I was a coward." Lucy's chest tightened painfully, but she remained still. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling like a man finally admitting defeat. "I started therapy," he said. "Twice a week. I'm terrible at it. I say all the wrong things. But I'm trying. I'm facing things I buried after my brother died. I'm facing myself." The streetlight flickered, and for a moment his face looked young in the way grief makes people, stripped of armor. "I can't ask you to forgive me," he said. "I can't ask you to come back into my world or my life. I broke your trust. You owe me nothing." Her throat tightened, emotion pressing against her ribs until it hurt to breathe. "Then why are you here, Adrian?" His answer came instantly, like it had lived on his tongue for weeks. "Because you were the first person in years to see me, not the billionaire, not the name on the building, but me. And I can't let the last thing you remember of me be the moment I chose silence over you." Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears away. "I needed you," she whispered. "Just once. I needed you to stand up for me. And you weren't there." His voice broke. "I know." A single, aching breath. "But I'm here now. Not to fix it. Not to pretend it didn't happen. I'm here because you deserve the truth, with no silence, no shields, no power behind it. Just me." They stood like that for a long moment. Two people shaped by hurt, by choices, by the impossible distance between their worlds. Finally, Adrian spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't change what I did. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. But if you'll let me, I want to try again. As a man learning how to be human. Not as a billionaire trying to win." Lucy closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the night settle around her, letting the weight of everything he said sink in. When she opened them again, she met his gaze fully, no running, no hiding. "I don't know what I want," she said honestly. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Adrian nodded. "Then I'll wait," he whispered. "For as long as it takes." And for the first time since everything fell apart, Lucy felt the tiniest shift, something not like forgiveness, but like the possibility of it. A quiet crack in the armor around her heart. A place where light could enter again. For a long moment after Adrian's words faded into the warm night, the world went quiet in a way Lucy hadn't felt in months. Not the suffocating silence of fear or scandal, but a gentler quiet, the kind that comes after a storm finally exhausts itself. She stood there on the sidewalk outside her building, watching him, trying to understand the shape of this new truth he had placed in front of her. It was not a plea, not a grand gesture, not a billionaire's attempt to fix what money could not reach. It was simply honesty, raw, scraped, trembling honesty, from a man who once believed vulnerability was a luxury only fools indulged in. And that, more than anything, was what made her chest ache. She took a slow breath, grounding herself. The past weeks had carved deep lines inside her. Humiliation, fear, the loss of her job, the collapse of her anonymity. Those weren't scars that faded overnight. Trust didn't regrow just because someone apologized, even sincerely. Adrian seemed to understand this. He didn't reach for her, didn't step closer. He simply waited, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense with a quiet patience that felt almost reverent. "I'm not asking for a future," he said softly, his voice steady but threaded with hope he didn't dare voice. "Just a chance to show you who I can be when I'm not hiding behind everything I built." Lucy let her eyes rest on him. The exhaustion, the regret, the vulnerability that once would have been unthinkable from a man like him. She saw the effort behind it, the internal war he must have fought to stand here tonight without armor. But she also saw herself, not the girl who had been swallowed by a scandal, not the woman running from cameras, but someone who had survived all of it and still chosen tenderness over bitterness. "I don't want to go backward," she finally said, voice quiet but sure. "If there's anything between us, it has to be different. Real. Not a secret, not a shadow of your world. And not at the cost of myself again." Adrian nodded, the relief in his eyes subtle but unmistakable. "You don't have to lose yourself," he murmured. "Not for me. Not ever." She stepped closer, not enough to close the space completely, but enough to let him know she wasn't walking away. "If we try this," she said, "it has to be slow. Honest. Grounded. No promises you can't keep. No expectations I can't survive. Slow," he repeated, as if committing the word to memory. "Honest." He hesitated. "I can do that." Lucy searched his face, looking for even a flicker of the old arrogance, the old walls, the old instinct to control everything he touched. She saw none of it. She only saw a man who had finally stopped running, from grief, from fear, from himself. A small, soft warmth unfurled in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not love. Not yet. But something real. Something possible. "Walk me inside," she asked. Not an invitation to stay. Not a promise of tomorrow. Just a step. A small, steady step in a direction she wasn't afraid of anymore. Adrian nodded gently, falling into step beside her as they moved toward the entrance. He didn't touch her, didn't try to claim a moment or a gesture. He simply walked next to her in silence, matching her pace, letting the quiet speak what neither of them was ready to say aloud. At the door, Lucy paused and met his eyes one more time. "If you hurt me again," she said softly, "I won't wait around for you to figure out your heart." "I won't ask you to," he replied. A beat passed. Then she offered him the faintest, most fragile smile, the kind that could disappear with the wrong word, but could grow with the right effort. "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Lucy." She stepped inside. He stayed on the sidewalk, hands still in his pockets, watching her go with a look that was not possession, not longing, but quiet gratitude. And for the first time since their worlds collided, Lucy felt a future that wasn't shaped by fear or fantasy. Just two imperfect people choosing, carefully and consciously, to meet each other halfway. Not a fairy tale, not a miracle, just a beginning. And sometimes, she realized, beginnings were the bravest kind of ending there was.